Hi, my name is Ashith Ram, and today I am joined by Abdullah Koker, and we are the co-hosts of the podcast The Second Curve. This podcast focuses on the second curve of learning that people often go through in their career, along with stories and experiences that have shaped who they are today. Our goal is to take these stories and share them, along with uncovering what the next big thing will be in their industry.
So today we are joined by our guest, Suchit Jain, and hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, we're doing great. So just to introduce yourself, could you get a quick rundown of who you are and what you do for the viewers?
Sure. So my name is Suchit Jain. I'm currently Vice President of Strategy and Development at Dassault Systems Solidworks. I'm an engineer by background. These days I work with a lot of companies in manufacturing and design world in basically creating everything you see around ourselves. As we see it, whether the furniture or the cars or the planes, etc. We produce software for engineering companies to design and manufacture, and I'm sort of helping companies do that.
Nice. And we did like research about you before, you came on to this podcast to talk, and you began your journey with you went to IIT Bombay and then you moved to USC. So could you talk about like the first curve of your career and like what was the most difficult thing when moving from academic engineering to like business and like strategy?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's been a little bit of a process, but just starting from the IIT Bombay. So, for people who know, I grew up in India, and IITs, or Indian Institute of Technologies, are sort of premier engineering institute. And I was lucky enough, worked hard to get in those institute for my undergraduate work, which I started in civil engineering. Anyway, this was in IIT Bombay, which is Bombay's Mumbai these days, known as that city. And I did a lot of engineering there. I mean, IIT Bombay, our technical institute, so it's focused around a lot of core physics, math, and then in first couple of years, then you get into your own domain and discipline you're focused in. I focus quite a bit on what is known as FEA, or finite element analysis, which is how virtually you can basically make sure that the parts are going to behave and function the way they are designed. Will they break? Will it overheat? Etc. Those kinds of answers we can find. So I focus on that. But one thing I would say during my IIT days, one thing good about those days was that you got to do a lot of things yourselves. The institute was primarily run because of course, we lived there. So a lot of the organizational aspects of it, besides the studying, was all done by the students. So a lot of it is you learned a lot of these networking and leadership qualities, if you will, around that. So I'd say that was one good part of what I went through. And then, of course, from there, usually in those days in India, this is back, by the way, I graduated in 92, so 1988 to 1992. I was at IIT Bombay. And you usually would apply for further studies, PhD work, and so on to US, which is what I did. And I was fortunate to get into University of Southern California in Los Angeles. Few other universities, including Cornell, for, part of the thing was you had to get scholarship to be able to come to US and all of that. So I'd gotten from few universities, but even though I'd never been to LA, I'd heard a lot of things about sunny California versus Cornell's and Ithaca's weather. So I ended up at USC, and of course I studied there more mechanical engineering, continued my work, a lot of it in FEA, also in nonlinear dynamics, etc. But my journey into sort of the business side of things was as I started to work and all that. I'll take a pause for a second, and I can go into that unless you have further questions on that part, but I can sort of describe from my school when I start to work.
Yeah, just a quick aside, I'm a little curious. You said you first started your studies in civil engineering and then you moved into FEA. I'm just curious, what drew you to FEA specifically in like mechanical engineering? Was there something about it like compared to the other engineerings, or was it just a normal kind of next step from math and physics?
Well, I'd say, so civil engineering and mechanical in some ways are adjacent because there are a lot of it is about, the materials and so on. I never at IIT, I was not so much into the infrastructure design and things like that. I was more in the material science, if you will, aspect of it. And one thing also about IIT is you go through the core couple of years in the first first years into core physics and math, even though I don't think I was very strong in those subjects, but those aspects of it I think appeal to me more. And when we talk about FEA, finite element analysis, is more math oriented. You're solving matrices of equations, if you will. So that attracted me, but also the whole idea of the formulation of how you can take a big problem. And it's fascinating, right? That how you can actually solve by solving smaller units of it, and then you combining the whole problem, you can actually solve the whole thing. So anyway, it was both the math and the physics and this intriguing idea where I felt the civil was more grassroots and a little bit, I don't want to offend anybody, but it felt a little boring to me. So I moved more into the mechanical side of it.
Makes sense.
Yeah, great. And like moving on, was there like a specific moment that you had that like made you realize engineering was moving into like more intelligence like driven, like compared to document driven, and like you realized you wanted to change in that like the pivot point?
I think we are, I think we're doing a little bit of a time lapse here, because keep in mind that I graduated back in 1992. And then between 1992, say all the way to, early 2000s, I was busy trying to mainstream simulation, because, in those days, the idea of FEA and simulation was reserved for the advanced degrees, people with, say, PhDs or at least masters. And then the common designers, people who are day-to-day designing the shape of an object. So let's say you're creating a furniture or some hub of a motorcycle or whatever you're designing, you are more focused on, like if you do a product design, the processes are an industrial designer or a concept designer may focus on the shape. Some of the engineers might talk about the functions, etc. of it. But then from the shape, you get into detail design, which is a lot of the CAD designers might be doing. And then you would do, once you get the shape and the form, some advanced engineers might do FEA to make sure that it'll work the way you intend it to work, the functional aspect of it. And that was always throwing it over the wall process. And my goal at that time, I was working for this company called SRAC, or our software was called Cosmos Simulation Software, FEA software. And our goal was to bring this idea of the ability to do FEA to the design engineers. So all the way till 2000, focus on that, make this whole simulation process kind of parallel with the design process, not afterwards. Of course, it saves time and money. And in the process, I ended up helping sell our company to Dassault Systems, where I work today. And, I'd say I learned a lot of these ideas of networking and working on the business side of things as well. But connecting to your question, and that's why I'm kind of giving you a long answer, all this idea of intelligence and AI is more the talk, I'd say, in last couple of years, if you will, right? Intelligence was always there, right? In computers, when you're doing sort of humans are working with computers, that intelligence has always been there. But if you are referring to AI type of work, which is some seminal work has happened in more recent year, like 2017, where this idea of LLMs and attention is everything paper came about. That's when really it turns into all of that. And we can definitely have a discussion about that, because I have a curious interest in that and I delve into that as well. But just to kind of make sure that the time lapse is not like in a day, it's suddenly I realize the document intelligence, that's more how the times are moving and all the industry moves. Because I went through I was lucky enough to go through the internet boom, and I saw that in the late 90s and early 2000s as well, right? The boom and the bust of internet and what internet did and changed. Guys, I'm old, right? So I come from the era of before cell phone. iPhone came only in 2007. Internet came about in 1999. And by the way, in my early years, right after 92, I graduated from IIT 1992 to say 96, 95, 96. I was at USC trying to finish my PhD, which I did not. I finished my master's. I did my qualifying, did not finish my PhD for, I had started to work and working on some of my visa processes and so on. But so a lot of this, you have to just remember, how the times were moving, because when I started my career, I was doing technical support and I was supporting companies who are using FEA, and I would do, support for Japan and all that. And this is even before the email time. So we were doing support using faxes. And I would not call it a pivot point, because this pivots didn't happen like, there was AI one day and it was not there before, or there was phone there and not there, right? What I'm saying is I can reflect back now and I can actually say that every moment actually has added to what I can do now. So, for example, if I did not have that fax and tech support experience, even with all the help of AI and advanced technology, I think I have a certain empathy, if you will, of how I would support the customer on the other side, right? Because so every bit of it is a learning point, and my message always to everybody is technology will always move, and where we are today, we got to soak it in and use it and leverage it because this will give you a connecting point to what you will do in future, if you will. So anyway, sorry for the long answer, but I think it.
No problem. And we are kind of going for that almost like time lapse, but sometimes we do. It's easy to forget that change happens over many many years. And I just wanted to fast forward to what you're doing now, so then we can also get into some of
Sure.
the other stuff that we talked about earlier as well. Regarding you combining, different texts and your ideologies and, the thing that you have going on Spotify. I'd love to get into that. But right now, let's fast forward to what you're doing right now as VP of Strategy and kind of like a high level view of what you do right now, like what your role is, and maybe the different things that you've done in the past that have helped you kind of in that.
Sure. So as I mentioned, I work for Dassault Systems, and within that, in particular, about software product and the ecosystem around Solidworks. And I'm one of the key executives within there. We do around $1.6 billion of revenue with Solidworks and surrounding products. And one of the things, there are three main things I'm focused on within my day-to-day job. One of them is around go-to-market and business strategy. This is an idea about, in go-to-market, it's about product pricing. How do we sell through an indirect channel? So there's a lot of tactics and strategies we have to use for that. Of course, we work in a world where their competition exists. So there's a lot of strategies around, of course, creating the right product, pricing, and the go-to-market strategy there, and how do we expand in different parts of the world, all of that kind of stuff. So that's more. And by the way, within that is M&A or any of the technologies we should look at. So that's more at the business and I would say strategy side of things. Second main thing, which personally, I believe I've learned a lot through that, and I've built some ecosystems around SolidWorks. Today, we have around 8 million users of our software, and a lot of them are very passionate about what they do. So something I've contributed and built within the company for a number of years is what I call as early engagement. The idea that we can engage with our prospective customers early on, as early on as when they are in high school or even middle school, right? When they start to learn SolidWorks, the design thinking and design process, that they are using the tools like SolidWorks early on, so that when they start a startup or when they go work for somebody, whatever, that things goes on. And I can tell you, out of these 8 million people, and I get to speak as part of my job with a lot of those people, when I meet them, they tell me that they have learned SolidWorks or know or passionate about it from back in their school days, in high school, with First Robotic, the FRC competition. By the way, you guys are in Westford, and I had also the opportunity, because my kids were also doing First Robotics, and there's a Westford team called Storm Gears, which I was mentoring in some of the years as well. But the point is that early engagement, working with the students, the startups, is a big passion of mine, and it also has helped SolidWorks tremendously. And I'd say in any business, this whole idea of innovator's dilemma, again, I'm not going to go into that, but I think by having a strong ecosystem where your customers are changing their community, their local, they're making an impact, is also a big sticky point for when people use your software and they won't change. So anyway, early engagement is one big pillar, and then this whole idea around user advocacy and how do you make your customers successful and how you turn them into sort of passionate users rather than just somebody using the software is also what myself and my team focuses on. So those are the day-to-day work. And then as part of this, as I was doing all of this, I got a lot into mentoring. I mentioned about First Robotics. I do a lot of work with Fab Foundation, which is part of MIT, this idea that unstructured manufacturing happens anywhere, and how do you enable the local economies in various parts of the world where technology is hard to get? How do we enable them? And again, I was exposed to a lot of these things in Bhutan, in Nepal, and in in Rwanda, country of Rwanda, and I'm very proud to be being involved in some of those things. So that has been a great passion working with the startups. Over years I've become an angel investor myself, and all of that which Abdullah you were referring to is also something I'm passionate about, is connecting a little bit of the physics and the metaphysics together, which is more of a hobby, if you will. And yeah, we can go in that rabbit hole, if you will, as well, which I love to do, but I know it may not be everybody's cup of tea.
Yeah. I mean, you like explained some like extremely impressive things that you've done, but I mean, yeah, we could definitely go into that physics and like conversation. But you also talked about like your work with like early engagement, and then you like mentoring like Farsi. So do you want to go into like what you've done with like startups and like mentoring people? Because like I think that's a huge part of your work.
Yeah. Do you have any
Yeah, yeah.
advice? Sorry for cutting you off. Just like a follow up. Do you have any advice for businesses that want to leverage early engagement? Are there any tips that you've learned over the years from mentoring and engaging with customers as early as high school?
Yes, of course. I mean, look, I fundamentally believe always that in a business, if you do the right things, it doesn't mean that it will not make money for you. My point is there's a good way of doing where you do the right things and always also makes money. And, at least I have worked in a domain where the kinds of work we do in high school and in mentoring children and students, which helps them in their career, but it also helps in creating kind of the products and the innovation we see around us. So encouraging students early on to be able to take their ideas and with the help of our software bring them to life I don't know if I would say I'm in the right surroundings or I chose the right career, but it's easy, right? Because if you talk about innovation and creation of products, whether it's about the Keurig machine or whether it's about the iRobot or whether it's about very simple things. I mean, I've met students who have created amazing kinds of unbreakable locks and using our software and things like that. So I think mentoring those students and giving them this confidence, if you will, that they can do anything and that they can express their ideas in more tangible ways. I found that it makes a direct connection with the students. And in our case, these students, when they come out, say they graduate from high school, go into college, they are maybe doing a Formula Car team, SA team, Baja team, rocket launching team, whatever you name it, they are thinking of, hey, I remember the Solidworks software that helps me do. So they are remembering that. And they are also motivated to go more in engineering than in other things because they can see that they can be part of creating the world. By the way, there's a quote which I always talk about where I say, well, scientists dream of the world, but engineers help create it. Right? So it's not just the dream, we make the dream realize. So a lot of students get motivated and do that. So for me, it has been very satisfying. And for businesses, I think I always say that, look, if you invest, if you will, time, effort, and money, that it comes back and pays, right? And I tell that to our sales teams all the time because a good sales team will not just talk about the immediate return, but actually if you do the right things, the return always comes. And so I'll connect a little bit philosophy. I think it's important. I always talk about something I read in Gita that, rather than focusing on the fruit on the tree, focus on nurturing the tree, the fruit will come. If you focus on the fruit and forget to nurture the tree, then the fruit never comes. So the key for any business is nurture the tree. The fruit will come. So do the right thing. And so the early engagement is really about nurturing the future, and you're nurturing the future of everything. Plus, it helps our company as well quite a bit, actually.
Yeah, and I really like how you tie in some of that philosophy as well. In fact, I'd actually love to go deeper on that. You talked about the fruit and the tree, and that's exactly like there's so many other similar like sayings. People talk about the law of attraction where if you focus on something, oftentimes people focus on money too much. And people will say, if you're going into career purely for the money, you forget about actually being passionate and being good at your job. The money will come, right? So, I'd love to hear your thoughts on maybe whether you've seen that in different parts of your life or pretty much wherever you want to go with this, with your physics and metaphysics and connecting a lot of it. Maybe especially with current advances in AI as well. I've seen commentaries on creativity and where it's going to go and how we should be approaching AI as a tool or as a supplement. And I just want to hear your thoughts on this because I know you're very passionate about like tying philosophy into things.
So yeah, I'll get to AI in a second, but on your first question about a little bit philosophy and physics and metaphysics, so let's connect them with a very simple example, right? Gravity, right? Gravity, we all know, like Newton said gravity is a force, right? But then later on, we knew that gravity, Einstein came in and gravity became a field, right? So the point being that it's not the force between the two objects, but the force is there because of the space and time curvature, right? So if you have two, they always talk about the heavy masses, because if you take a bed sheet or something and put the two heavy balls, the curve is what attracts the thing. So the field, it's creating a field, it's not a force. And what I say in life, in business, in everything, your job is to create a field and not a force. Because here's the beauty of the field, right? Force is always one-to-one. So I can focus on a person, on something. I have to spend a lot of energy in creating that direct connection, which is good. However, if I can create an ecosystem, create a field, that all the objects in that field that makes a lot of sense, right? And I think in work and business and everything, that's what you got to do. And sometimes it can be done very fast and quick, and sometimes it can take time. I mean, in SolidWorks, I would say that, we have created an ecosystem. So rather than going after each and every customer all the time, because we have so many of them, we create an ecosystem that the customers will come to us, right? So if I can create the right field and the right environment, and it took us some time, but all the examples I've given you earlier from schools or the work we have done in Fab Labs or what we are doing with the customers, it all creates that field where it comes to us. So anyway, that's one sort of a business and combining physics and business and some of the learnings. Going into a little bit of the AI world, maybe I'll go really deep into something which gets into quantum physics and probabilistic nature of everything, right? So let's just think about it for a second, right? There's a philosophy that nothing is real, that everything, if you guys have all seen Matrix, the movie, right? Mm-hmm. If Abdullah, you can't see behind your head, right? So you don't know what the scene looks like behind you. Maybe there's nothing out there. The only movie which exists is what you are seeing in front of you, right? Right. So this idea of a game simulation theory, right? That if you're in a video game, right, video game gets created as you are observing and you're doing things. So right. This whole idea of probability is that in quantum physics, we also talked about that, everything exists in a wave form, right? It's like that bell-shaped curve that if you take an atomic particle, you say, well, does it exist here? Does it exist here? Well, it has a probability of existing at all these places, but very low probability. But as soon as you can observe it, that probability in being at that particular location and time becomes 100%. So this gets into physics, Schrodinger equation, all of that kind of stuff, right? So that's the physics part of it, and the quantum physics, that nothing is certain. This is the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Nothing is certain. You cannot determine both the sort of the location and the velocity or momentum of a particle at the same time. And your observation is limited by the tools you have, right? In the sense, before microscopes got invented, you didn't know what existed. Correct. At that minute level. So observe. So everything is probable. And when you observe something, it becomes 100% probability. Now, if you go back to AI is all statistical and probability, right? I mean, you guys, if you know the fundamentals of AI, as we say, the tokens or the text which is being it's based on predictions. And if you train it right, those predictions start to get all the semantics and everything in there. And I won't go into the deep theories of LLM, but I will start from a very simple thing. Back in 1905, there was a I would call him a statistics guy, Markov. And there's this thing called as Markov's chain, where the guy said that if I take certain literature, the number of times or when a vowel will appear in a sentence, he could predict that.
Right. Yeah.
Based on large numbers. Because, statistically, that's bound to happen given the number of alphabets out there. And he could prove that. That became Markov's chain, from which came about the Google in recent days, the whole Google page ranking, etc. happens, all the semantic databases. And if you fundamentally think about AI, is also is probability wise, it's telling you based on the same thing. So probabilistic aspects of things where nothing is certain, but if you put it in the context, it becomes certain. AI is exactly that. The better answer is all about context. The more context you give, the better answer you will get, right? So in some metaphysical sense, all of this connects in a very interesting way. And I will just close this part of it by saying for people, for the audience, I would recommend to read a sort of a couple of page essay by Isaac Asimov in 1950s, and it's called The Last Question. So if you Google it, you'll find it. It's about entropy, and it gets into some philosophy of life and AI and all of that kind of stuff. So
Wow, very well said. Yeah, I think I like learned a lot in just like that like specific part of what you said about like physics, metaphysics, and like how that ties into AI and philosophy. So like we can definitely go into like a deeper conversation about those specific things. But I also wanted to like talk about your work in like Spotify, and then also like what you did with MIT, with like helping students. So you want to go into that and explain to us a little bit about that?
yeah, the Spotify work is relatively simple. I mean, I like writing as well, so there's a lot of writing as in, I mean, this is no, I don't think I'm a good writer by any things, but it started with my expressing some over family times I used to write some poems, etc., and over years I've done that. And then when AI came about, I was experimenting with different elements of AI from ChatGPT in the first days, but then Google Notebook LM came about and I was experimenting with that. And what I started to do was I took my some of my writings, say a poem, and then I would just explain that a little bit, and then I put it in Google Notebook LM, and sometimes I would even scan that data, like because some of my poems I had written a long time ago on a piece of paper or whatever, and I took a picture of it, so I had those pictures. It's stored on my Google Drive. So I fed it to, say, Google Notebook LM or ChatGPT, got the poem extract, then gave some explanations of it. And Google Notebook in the early days had this beautiful feature where it would take the article and then will create a podcast and some couple of people talking about that particular topic, right? And so, okay. So I did that, and then I took that podcast and I put it on Spotify, and then I ended up creating my own channel called Solify, like Solify, on Spotify, where I created a means by which I can take from my writings of articles into a way where you can listen to it casually in a more entertaining way through this AI generated thing. And now my pipeline is, if I have a writing, I might use Medium or something to publish the article, but it's very simple. I take the writing, have a conversation with AI, could be Gemini, it could be Grok in my car, document that, and then take it to Notebook LM, and then put it in a podcast, and then turn it into Solify. And usually that would take me, I mean, usually the process is less than 30 minutes if you have the right topic in mind. So I think it helped me get a creative thing out where people may not want to read, but hey, at least my wife would listen to a Spotify thing in the car, or she's forced to listen, right? Well, she's sitting with me. So anyway, that's kind of what I did there on the Spotify stuff.
Yeah. And I think like the Spotify thing is very cool as well. And before we go into like our concluding thoughts, we always ask like one question, and that's like mostly, what advice would you give to people that are like entering the job market and that are like gonna go into like specific fields and maybe have like changes in their career, and now like like when you talk about like physics, metaphysics, and how that's revolutionizing things. So like I know a lot of people want to go into physics and AI and like statistics. So like what do you, and like how that in your philosophy with like sales and like business. So what advice would you have if you could like explain it briefly for people that are just entering the job market?
Yeah. So I mean, one thing is, well, look, AI will change. I'm a firm believer that in a few years things will be very different, right? We don't know what we don't know, and AI just has this remarkable growth. So for all the people who are listening, the students, young people, you got to be familiar with everything. I'm not saying you got to be an expert, but at least there's enough literature out there that you should be familiar with it. And what I would go one step further, don't be just familiar with it, but use it. And I'm saying even go one step further, just don't use it as a textual chat GPT, whatever. Go ahead and try to code something. And there's this idea of vibe coding, which is very straightforward. Anybody has any questions on that, I can guarantee that each one of you can, if you sit down with me in 10 minutes, you can create an application, even if you're zero programming experience. So the world is going there. Be aware of where it's going, because, the types of jobs and skills will be different, but what is going to be always needed is the design thinking, and is this idea that that you can express yourself. So the coding and implementation are tools, but the core knowledge of human being, of creative ideas, are still yours. So make sure you can know. Maybe I didn't even think about this before, but I'll say, if AI is a horse, then you should just know very well how to horse ride, and that's it. So you're still the rider, the horse, because the horse is not gonna. I mean, it'll take control of you if you don't know how to take control of it. So make sure you know how to control and know and understand. So that's what I would say in terms of physics, statistics, this and that. I'd say spend some time in learning about all of these things, and I mean, be passionate about whatever you do. Don't force yourself into something which you are not passionate about, because you're not going to succeed in anything which you're not passionate about. So have the passion for something. And again, sometimes I easily say it, but passion is not just, I mean, you got to be exposed to these things too. Not everybody is born with, a natural skill. Sometimes as you get exposed, so expose yourself to various things early on, and then be passionate about something, and, take it. And, to tell you frankly, in the early days, you're not gonna lose anything, because the risk is very little. And Abdullah, I think you were giving me some advice, what your dad had told me as well, told you as well. And I would say, yeah, follow those advice, because, in the early stages, you have nothing to lose. You have everything to gain from experimentation and following, not worrying about change, or am I selecting the right path? I would say the one wrong thing to do is not doing anything, because analysis paralysis is not what we focused on right now. But be deliberate, be passionate, and do things. Guys, I'll have to rush, but I wanted to, maybe if we can end on these.
Yeah, definitely. We just want to say thank you so much for, coming on the podcast today. We learned a lot, about your different philosophies, and then your work, and then how you're helping people, from early on, find out what they want to do and what they want to be passionate about. Abdullah, do you have any last things to say?
Yeah, I think it was a good conversation. We got some cool perspective from, someone who's managing things at such a large scale. And it's like, it's very interesting to see, like, companies doing billions of dollars in revenue, yet you're working with in mentoring people, people in our age, right? And you're like, that's like starting from that early. And like, as you said, like letting people and encouraging people to expose themselves to so many different things, kind of creating that field around them where they can then attract the things that they are passionate to, right? Instead of trying to force something that they're not passionate about. I love this conversation. I think it was very productive. And, in the future, we'd love to talk with you again at some point.
Absolutely. And we can dive more. And thank you guys for interesting questions, giving me the opportunity to speak. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much.